Helen Navarro had never been one to fear the dark. For 30 years, she had lived in the same beige stucco house on the edge of Albuquerque, where the desert met the first rise of the Sandia foothills. Nights there were quiet, just the wind moving through the mesquite trees, the faraway hum of a freight train, and the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. But lately, that stillness had begun to feel different, almost watchful. It started 3 months after her 59th birthday. At precisely 9:15 p.m., her phone rang for the first time. The display lit up with her son's name, Marcus Navarro. She smiled, relieved. Since her husband's death 4 years earlier, Marcus rarely called except on weekends. She answered cheerfully, "Hey, sweetheart." There was no greeting, only a flat, measured voice. "Mom, are you alone?" Helen blinked, puzzled. "Yes, I suppose I am. Why?" The line went dead. She frowned at the phone, confused but not alarmed. Maybe a bad signal. Maybe something at work distracted him. She waited for a text, but none came. The next evening, 9:15 again. Same question. "Mom, are you alone?" This time she laughed nervously. "Marcus, what's going on? You're scaring me a little." Click. Silence. By the third night, she was starting to feel the weight of the pattern. She even told herself she wouldn't pick up, but when the ringtone echoed through the empty house, her hand moved on its own. "Yes, Marcus, I'm alone," she said, her tone firm, challenging. The call ended just the same. Helen sat staring at her reflection in the dark TV screen. Behind her, the kitchen clock read 9:17. 2 minutes of sound, then nothing. She mentioned it to her neighbor, Rosa Martinez, the next morning over coffee. Rosa, a warm woman in her 60s who lived 2 houses down, brushed it off with a chuckle. "Men never stop worrying about their mothers. Maybe he thinks you're lonely." But Helen couldn't shake the feeling that this was something else, something colder. Marcus wasn't the affectionate type, but he wasn't cruel either. Protective, yes, after his father's death. That protectiveness had turned into something harder to read. Frequent questions about her finances, who she spent time with, whether she'd ever considered moving closer to him in the city. That night, she sat by the window, phone in hand, watching the sky fade into violet. The call came again, right on schedule. "Mom, are you alone?" The tone was calm, detached, almost procedural. She hesitated before answering. "No." "Rosa stopped by earlier," she lied. There was a pause on the other end, the faint sound of his breathing. "Only Rosa? There's no one else there." The question sliced through her chest like a thin blade. "Of course not," she said, voice tight. "Why are you asking me this?" "Just checking. Make sure the doors are locked." The line clicked off. That night, Helen double-checked the locks anyway. The sound of the bolt sliding into place was louder than she remembered. In her quiet house, her supposed sanctuary, the air now felt weighted with something she couldn't name. When the clock struck 9:15 the next evening, she turned her phone face down on the table. But the vibration still came, steady, persistent, like a heartbeat refusing to die. And for the first time in years, Helen realized she was afraid of answering her own son. Rosa Martinez thought the whole thing was funny at first. The 2 women sat on Helen's porch one Saturday morning, a pot of coffee steaming between them as the desert sun crept over the ridge. "Maybe he's just worried some handsome stranger's keeping you company," Rosa teased, her laugh bright and throaty. "Sounds more like a jealous boyfriend than a son." Helen smiled politely, but her eyes stayed on the door. The dead bolt gleamed in the light, and she had the uneasy urge to stand up and check it again. When Rosa followed her gaze, her laughter faded. "Helen," she said softly, "how long have you been doing that?" Helen hesitated. "Doing what?" "Checking the locks. You've looked at that door 3 times since I got here." Helen flushed, embarrassed. "Oh, it's just habit, I guess." but it wasn't. Each night before she turned off the lights, she checked every window latch, every bolt on the front and back doors, even the garage. Then, without meaning to, she did it again an hour later. The phone calls had wormed their way into her mind like a rhythm she couldn't escape. 9:15 p.m., the sound of her ringtone was beginning to feel like a warning bell. That afternoon, she called Evelyn Grant, an old friend from her teaching days who had gone on to become an attorney. Evelyn was practical, the kind of woman who approached emotion like a math problem. After listening to the whole story, she exhaled slowly. "Helen, I don't think he's trying to hurt you, but something about this isn't healthy. Document everything. Dates, times. What he says. If it escalates, you'll need a record." Helen frowned. "You think it's some kind of mental illness? Could be anxiety, could be early paranoia, or something as simple as obsessive behavior," Evelyn replied. "Whatever it is, you can't ignore it." Helen promised she'd take notes, though the thought of treating her own son like a case study made her stomach twist. She didn't want to believe Marcus was losing control. She told herself he was just lonely, maybe stressed, but when she tried to reach him during the day, he rarely answered. His voicemail always played the same message. "Hey, it's Marcus. Leave it short." In person, he seemed fine, too fine. When he stopped by one Sunday, he hugged her, smiled, and talked about the weather and his new freelance accounting clients. But his eyes darted around the house as he spoke, scanning every corner as if taking inventory. When Helen brought up the calls, his expression changed. "Mom, you're imagining things," he said lightly. "You know how bad reception is out here." Then he looked at his watch and excused himself before she could press further. That night, 9:15 came like clockwork. Helen let it ring until it stopped. 2 minutes later, it rang again. She answered, heart pounding. "Mom," came his voice, calm, mechanical. "Are you alone?" She hung up without speaking. The silence afterward was immense, so heavy she could hear the refrigerator hum and her own breath shaking. The next evening, she didn't even try to resist. The ritual had become a living thing between them, predictable, suffocating, impossible to stop. And somewhere deep inside, Helen began to fear that Marcus wasn't checking on her safety at all. He was confirming her isolation. At first, Helen blamed herself for the little things. A drawer left half open. She must have forgotten to close it. A framed photo of her late husband turned face down. Perhaps she'd bumped the table while dusting. But by the third time it happened, something in her shifted. One morning, she noticed faint scratches on the brass lock of the back door, like someone had tried to fit a key that didn't quite belong. She crouched down, tracing the marks with her fingertip. The metal felt cold even in the warmth of the desert morning. She stared for a long time, the air heavy in her lungs. Maybe she was getting forgetful. She told herself. Maybe grief had finally found a way to make her paranoid. Then Sunday came, and with it, Marcus. He arrived unannounced, carrying a box from La Posta Bakery, her favorite flan with caramel glaze. "Thought you'd like a treat," he said, kissing her cheek. His smile was soft, but his eyes moved around the room the way a stranger studies a space they don't quite trust. "Everything okay?" Helen asked, trying to sound casual. "You've been calling a lot lately." Marcus chuckled. "You know me, Mom. Just making sure you're safe out here. This neighborhood's not what it used to be." He spooned a bite of flan onto a plate, then added, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time you sold this place." Helen froze mid-pour, the coffee trembling in her hand. "Sell the house?" "Yeah, it's too big for you alone. Maintenance, security, it's a lot. I already looked into a few condos downtown, close to me. Nice places, gated, safe." She set the cup down carefully. "I appreciate the thought, Marcus, but your father and I built this home. Every corner of it has meaning. I'm not ready to leave. His face tightened, just for a second. Then came the smile again, bright, automatic, wrong. Of course, Mom. Just thinking ahead. You know I only want the best for you. But the warmth in his voice didn't match his eyes. They were calculating, almost measuring her. Helen tried to laugh it off, changing the subject to the flan, to his work, to anything that might soften the tension curling between them. Yet even as they ate, she noticed how often he glanced at the door, how his gaze flickered to the hallway leading to her bedroom. After he left, the house felt heavier than before. The silence didn't comfort her, it pressed down. Helen wandered from room to room, checking the locks again, counting her jewelry boxes, looking under the bed as if expecting to find evidence of a stranger. Her pulse quickened when she reached the study. The bottom drawer, the one where she kept old tax papers and bank receipts, was open an inch. She hadn't touched it since last week. She closed it slowly, her hand trembling. "Get a grip," she whispered to herself. But that night, as she sat in her living room with the TV murmuring in the background, the thought returned. Sharp and insistent. What if it isn't your imagination? At midnight, she booted up her laptop, searching for discrete home security cameras. The cursor blinked in the search bar while her reflection stared back at her, pale, anxious, lit only by the blue glow of the screen. She ordered a small set of motion-activated cameras. Next day delivery. It wasn't fear guiding her anymore. It was the need to know. When she finally turned off the lights, she double-checked the doors one last time. The lock clicked into place, solid and final. Yet Helen couldn't shake the feeling that someone else already had a key. It took Helen nearly 3 weeks before she gathered the courage to review the footage. The cameras had arrived quickly, and she'd installed them herself, one by the front door, one in the hallway, another near her small home office. At first, she avoided looking at the recordings altogether. She told herself it was silly, that she'd find nothing but hours of an empty house and the occasional flicker of passing headlights. But one restless night, after yet another 9:15 call, she sat at her desk with a mug of untouched tea and opened the video folder labeled June. The first few clips were uneventful. The sway of curtains, the clock's reflection in the dark, the faint glow of a passing car. Then, around 1:20 a.m. on a Thursday movement, a shadow crossed the hallway, slow, deliberate. Helen leaned forward, her breath catching as a figure appeared on the screen. A hooded man, tall, moving with uncanny familiarity. He didn't break in, he unlocked the door. Her pulse thundered as she watched him walk straight to her office, pull open drawers, thumb through stacks of papers. He didn't steal anything, he just looked. After a few minutes, he turned toward the bedroom, paused outside the door, then quietly retraced his steps and left the house, locking the door behind him. For a long time, Helen couldn't move. The room seemed to shrink around her. Her throat went dry, her heartbeat loud enough to drown the soft hum of the refrigerator. She rewound the footage and watched again, hoping she'd imagined it, that she'd see something, anything, to suggest it was a stranger. But even in the dim light, she recognized the way he walked, the way his shoulders sloped slightly to the left. It was Marcus, her own son. She clicked through other nights, and the truth only deepened. He had been entering her home repeatedly. Some nights he rummaged through drawers. Others he simply sat on the living room couch, motionless for 10, sometimes 20 minutes, watching, listening. Helen covered her mouth to stifle a sound she didn't recognize, a small, wounded gasp. The footage blurred through her tears. How long had this been happening? Why? She reached for her phone, hands trembling, and dialed Evelyn. "Evelyn, it's him," she whispered when her friend answered groggily. "Marcus. He's been coming into the house at night. I have it on video." Within 20 minutes, headlights washed over the driveway. Evelyn Grant, in her robe and slippers, burst through the door. Let me see, she said. Helen replayed the footage in silence, unable to look away. When the video ended, Evelyn's face was pale. He has a key, she said flatly. Helen nodded. I don't know what to do. He's not stealing anything. He's just there. Evelyn exhaled, rubbing her temples. We need to confront him. But not yet. First, we need proof of intent. Helen stared at her friend, unsure if she had the strength for whatever that meant. Evelyn's voice softened. We'll do it smart. He calls every night, right? Next time he does, you'll tell him you're alone. I'll be here with you, but he won't know that. The thought made Helen's stomach twist. You think he'll come? I think he already has a pattern, Evelyn said quietly. If you break it, he'll react. Helen looked toward the dark hallway, where the glow from the office camera blinked faintly red. She could almost feel Marcus's presence there. His footsteps, his breath, his strange calm. The house that had once felt safe now pulsed with quiet dread. All right, she said finally. Tomorrow night I'll answer. The following evening, the air felt thicker than usual. Hot, restless, almost humming with static. Helen could barely keep her hand steady as she set her phone on the coffee table. The clock read 9:13 p.m. Evelyn sat beside her, silent, her posture alert, her eyes flicking to the front window every few seconds. The two women didn't speak. When the ringtone finally sliced through the quiet, Helen nearly jumped. She took a breath, lifted the phone, and pressed accept. Mom, came Marcus's voice, smooth and even. Are you alone? Helen met Evelyn's eyes, heart hammering so loudly she thought it might bleed through the phone. Yes, she whispered. I'm alone. A brief silence. Then the call disconnected. For nearly an hour afterward, nothing happened. Evelyn tried to convince her to lock herself in the bedroom and call the police preemptively, but Helen refused. She needed to see this with her own eyes to understand what he wanted. She felt like she was standing on a trembling line between terror and heartbreak. At 10:42 p.m., a faint metallic click echoed through the house, the sound of a key turning in the back door. Evelyn froze mid-sentence. Helen's breath caught as the latch shifted and the door creaked open. The air moved, subtle but undeniable. He was inside. They crept to the bedroom and eased themselves into the closet, leaving the door cracked just enough for Evelyn's small flashlight to show a sliver of the hallway. The silence was suffocating. Helen could hear her own pulse roaring in her ears. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, moved down the hall. The beam of a flashlight swept across the floor, sliding under the crack at the bottom of the closet door. Helen held her breath as Marcus appeared in the doorway. He was wearing a gray hoodie, his movements calm, methodical. He scanned the room with his flashlight, pausing at the bed. He reached out, touching the blanket, then whispered softly, "Mom." The word hung in the air, both tender and chilling. When no one answered, he turned and opened the dresser drawers one by one, examining papers, jewelry boxes, even the nightstand. Every motion was deliberate, practiced. Helen bit her lip to stop herself from making a sound. Her whole body trembled. A single exhale might give them away. After a few long minutes, Marcus turned off his flashlight and stood perfectly still as if listening. Then he backed out of the room and disappeared down the hallway. The faint thud of the back door closing signaled his exit. Evelyn exhaled sharply, her composure cracking. That's it. We're calling the police. But Helen grabbed her arm, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, not yet. Let me talk to him first. I need to understand. Helen, Evelyn said, staring in disbelief. He broke into your house. He was searching your bedroom. I know, Helen said, tears spilling down her face. But he's my son. Something's wrong with him. If we call the police now, we might lose him forever. Evelyn hesitated, torn between reason and compassion. Finally, she sighed. lowering her phone. "One day. That's all you get. And you're not spending a second of that day alone." Helen nodded weakly. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely close the closet door behind them. Somewhere outside, the desert wind picked up, brushing against the windows with a hollow whistle. The house felt both familiar and foreign now, hers, yet no longer safe. That night, Helen didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the door Marcus had just passed through, the word "Mom" echoing in her head like a ghost she couldn't banish. Downtown Albuquerque looked different in daylight, louder, more crowded, full of restless energy, but Helen could barely take it in. She and Evelyn climbed the narrow stairwell of Marcus's apartment building just after noon, the air smelling faintly of hot asphalt and dust. Evelyn had insisted on coming with her, citing safety in numbers, though both women knew this wasn't a social call. Marcus's door was unlocked. Helen hesitated before pushing it open, half hoping they'd find the place clean and ordinary so she could go home and forget all of it. Instead, the moment they stepped inside, a chill settled over her. The air was stale, thick with the smell of burnt coffee and something metallic. The curtains were drawn tight, casting the small living room in a gray half-light. Stacks of unopened mail sat on the kitchen counter. Credit card statements, utility shutoff notices, and envelopes marked past due in red. On the table lay neat piles of documents. Helen reached for one and froze. It was a copy of her own bank statement. Next to it, another, her property tax bill. Her stomach twisted as she flipped through the stack. Every sheet bore her name, her address, her account numbers. Evelyn took one of the papers, brow furrowed. Where did he even get these? Helen's voice was barely audible. He must have copied them when he came over. On the desk against the wall, a legal folder caught Evelyn's eye. She opened it and drew out a form. Power of attorney. Helen's name was printed neatly in the signature block, except the handwriting wasn't hers. The signature was close practice, but wrong. The H looped differently. Evelyn's face hardened. Helen, this is forgery. This is criminal. Helen backed away as though the paper were radioactive. No, he wouldn't. He's sick, Evelyn. He needs help. Not. Help doesn't look like this. Evelyn's tone was flat. Helen turned toward the small kitchenette, seeking air. That's when she saw it, a white plastic bottle sitting on the counter, label half torn, marked "Only Sleep 8." Next to it, a notepad with scribbled dosage notes. 15 milligrams at bedtime, double if necessary. Evelyn, Helen whispered. That's not mine. Her friend joined her, picked up the bottle carefully with a tissue, shaking it gently. Not over the counter, she muttered. No pharmacy label. Someone filled this by hand. They exchanged a look, one part disbelief, one part dread. Then, faintly from down the hall, the soft metallic sound of a key sliding into the apartment lock. Evelyn's head snapped toward the door. He's here, she mouthed. Helen's heart slammed against her ribs. The doorknob began to turn. They didn't speak. Evelyn grabbed Helen's wrist, pulling her toward the back stairwell. The hinges groaned as the outer door opened, just as they reached the landing. Marcus's voice drifted in, casual, humming under his breath. Evelyn eased the stairwell door, closed behind them. They descended as fast as their shaking legs allowed, Helen clutching the rail to keep from falling. When they burst out onto the sunlit street, the world looked blindingly bright, unreal. Only when they reached Evelyn's car did Helen realize she was still holding her breath. Evelyn slid the small bottle into her purse. We're taking this to Victor Allen, she said, her old colleague, a retired forensic chemist. Helen's voice broke. Do you think he meant to? Evelyn didn't answer. She started the engine, eyes fixed ahead. We'll let the science tell us. But whatever that was in there. Helen, it wasn't your son anymore. The desert wind blew through the half-open window as they drove, carrying the faint scent of dust and heat. Helen stared out at the highway, the edges of her world collapsing quietly, one truth at a time. Victor Allen didn't take long to call back. His voice, calm but grave, filled the silence of Evelyn's kitchen. "It's a combination of barbiturates and opioids," he said. "A strong enough dose would put someone to sleep permanently and quietly. This isn't medication. It's poison." Helen's hands trembled as she held the phone. The reality of his words crashed through her, cold and undeniable. Evelyn thanked him and ended the call, but the quiet that followed was worse than any noise. That evening, Helen tried to distract herself by cleaning. She vacuumed every room twice, her movements sharp, mechanical. The house still smelled faintly of fear. Around 7, her phone rang. It was Rosa Martinez. "Helen," Rosa said, a bit breathless, "I was vacuuming under your bed earlier. Hope you don't mind, but I saw something strange. A small metal box with wires. I didn't touch it, but it looked like a timer." Helen's chest tightened. "A timer?" "I think so. I figured maybe it was some kind of alarm system you installed." But Rosa trailed off, hearing Helen's sharp inhale. "Should I come back?" "No," Helen said quickly. "Don't. Stay home. Lock your doors." 10 minutes later, Evelyn was back at the house. They both went to the bedroom, Helen's flashlight cutting through the dusk. She knelt down, her knees creaking against the hardwood, and peered beneath the bed. There it was, a small device the size of a paperback, connected by a thin wire that trailed toward the wall and disappeared behind the baseboard. Evelyn crouched beside her, tracing the wire's path to the propane line that ran along the wall to the furnace. Her voice dropped. "This is connected to the gas line. And that," she nodded at the metal box, "is a timer." Helen staggered back, gripping the nightstand for balance. He was going to set it off. Evelyn pulled out her phone. "Snapping photos. We're not touching it. I'll call Detective Ortiz." The police arrived within the hour. 2 officers in dark uniforms crouched over the device, murmuring to each other in low tones. One of them, a younger officer with close-cropped hair, looked up at Helen. "Ma'am, this is sophisticated. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. We've seen something similar recently." Helen blinked. "Similar?" The officer nodded. "Monterey County a few months ago. Elderly woman, found dead in a house explosion. Looked like an accident. But after we reopened the case, we found the same kind of timer rigged to her gas line. Her son was the beneficiary on her insurance." The room tilted slightly as Helen sank onto the bed. Evelyn moved to steady her, but Helen's voice came out hollow, detached. "Insurance," she whispered. Marcus, he made me sign papers a few months ago. Said it was a new policy." Ortiz's expression hardened. "We'll need those documents, Mrs. Navarro, and we'll need to locate your son." The officers carefully dismantled the device and carried it out in evidence bags. When they were gone, the house felt unbearably silent again. Helen sat in the dark, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Evelyn knelt in front of her. "You understand what this means," she said softly. Helen's eyes were glassy. "He wanted the insurance. My son planned my death." Outside, the last light of day faded over the Sandia Mountains, painting the sky in deep crimson. Inside the house, Helen sat unmoving, her heart hollowed out by a truth too heavy to grieve. The call came at dusk. Helen was sitting by the kitchen window when the phone rang again. 9:15 p.m. sharp. Her hand hovered over it, shaking. Evelyn sat nearby, eyes on the device that Detective Samuel Ortiz had given her earlier that day, a small tracker to triangulate Marcus's signal. They were ready, though neither of them felt prepared for what might come next. Helen pressed answer. Marcus's voice burst through immediately, faster and rougher than before. Mom, don't hang up. You have to listen to me. Marcus, she said, keeping her tone calm, where are you? They're watching you, he hissed. You don't see it, but I do. The walls, the cameras, they're everywhere. You think you can trust Evelyn, but she's part of it. They all are. Helen glanced at Evelyn, who nodded quietly toward the tracker. Ortiz's team was already listening on the other line, working to pinpoint the location. No one's watching me, honey, Helen said softly. You're confused. Please come home. Let me help you. Marcus's breathing grew erratic. You don't understand. The voices won't stop. They keep saying I have to fix it before it's too late. Before they take you away. Helen swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into her words. What voices? Marcus. He laughed, a dry, broken sound. The ones who've been watching you since Dad died. I know what they want. I had to protect you, Mom. Ortiz's voice crackled through Evelyn's earpiece. Keep him talking. We're close. Helen gripped the phone tighter. Protect me from what? The gas, Marcus whispered. You don't know how easy it is. One turn, one spark, and it's done. You'd never feel a thing. Evelyn's face drained of color. Helen's mind went blank for a moment. Then she remembered the timer under her bed, the hiss of the propane line, the faint smell she'd ignored weeks ago. She steadied her voice. Marcus, please. Listen to me. I'm safe now. You don't have to do this. But he was slipping further into madness. They made me sign papers. Insurance. It's not about money, it's about control. They'll say it's my fault, but it's theirs, Mom. They're inside everything. Ortiz's voice again. We've got him. 2 blocks east. Stay on the line another minute. Helen's voice broke despite her effort. Marcus, where are you? Please just come home. The sound that came next wasn't speech. It was sobbing, raw, and childlike. Then, abruptly, the call ended. Ortiz and his team arrived within minutes, swarming the property. Officers rushed to the backyard and through the kitchen door. One called out from the bedroom, timers armed. Less than a minute on the clock. The room erupted into motion. 2 officers knelt beneath the bed, cutting wires with practiced precision. A sharp metallic snap, then silence. The ticking stopped. Ortiz exhaled heavily, sweat glistening at his temple. Another 60 seconds, and this place would have gone up. Helen stood frozen, unable to speak, watching as they sealed the device in an evidence bag. By dawn, Marcus was gone, vanished into the sprawl of the desert city. Police issued a warrant for attempted homicide and financial fraud, his photo sent to every agency in the state. Helen sat on her porch as the sky lightened over the Sandia Mountains, the cold wind brushing her face. The house behind her was quiet, but she no longer felt safe within it. Somewhere out there, her son was running. From the law, from his mind, and from the truth she had finally stopped denying. 3 days passed before Helen's phone rang again. This time, not from Marcus, but from Street Teresa Psychiatric Hospital. The nurse's tone was careful, almost rehearsed. Mrs. Navarro, your son turned himself in this morning. He said he was afraid he might hurt someone. For a long moment, Helen couldn't speak. She felt both relief and sorrow flood through her like cold water. When she finally drove to the hospital with Detective Ortiz's escort, the sun was burning low over the desert, staining the mountains red. Dr. Philip Sanchez met her in the lobby, a kind man in his 50s with tired eyes. He explained that Marcus had been evaluated and diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a severe form of psychosis that blended paranoia with delusional thinking. He's not a monster, Mrs. Navarro, the doctor said gently. He's ill. The illness magnifies fear until it becomes reality. He truly believed he was protecting you from imaginary threats. Helen listened, numb, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Protecting her. The words echoed cruelly. She was escorted to the ward, her footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. The smell of disinfectant hung heavy in the air. When she reached Marcus's room, he was sitting by the window in paper scrubs, staring at the Sandia Mountains. He turned when she entered, and for a moment she saw not the man who had broken into her home, but the little boy who used to bring her wildflowers from the backyard. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracking, "I didn't mean to scare you. I thought they were after you." The voices kept saying it was the only way to save you. Helen's throat tightened. "Save me? Marcus, you almost—" The words broke before she could finish. She sank into the chair beside his bed. He reached for her hand, his touch trembling, desperate. "I wanted to stop them," he murmured. "I saw them following you, inside the house and the phone. I thought if I could just end it, you'd be free." Tears blurred her vision. "Free from what, sweetheart?" He looked at her with hollow sincerity. "From the people watching you." The silence that followed was unbearable. "Dr. Sanchez's voice came softly from behind her. "He isn't fully aware of what he's done. His mind connects fear with logic. It makes the impossible feel necessary. It's the illness, not intent." But Helen wasn't sure where illness ended and choice began. She wanted to forgive him, yet the image of him standing in her bedroom, flashlight in hand, whispering "Mom," still haunted her nights. She studied his face, the gaunt cheeks, the flicker of confusion in his eyes, and wondered whether the man she'd raised still existed beneath the sickness. When she finally stood to leave, Marcus gripped her hand tightly. "You'll lock your doors, right?" he asked. "They come at night." Her voice shook. "Yes, Marcus. I'll lock them. Outside." The evening wind carried the scent of rain over the desert. Helen stepped into the fading light, torn between grief and the faintest flicker of peace. She didn't know if she pitied her son, feared him, or simply mourned the part of him that had been lost long before she realized it. The line between madness and malice had dissolved completely, leaving only the quiet ache of a mother who still wanted to believe her child meant no harm. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers and the distant hum of the air conditioner. Helen sat in the front row beside Evelyn, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as the prosecutor presented the final piece of evidence. On the screen before them flashed photos of the dismantled gas device, the unlabeled bottle of barbiturates, the forged power of attorney forms, and the life insurance policy naming Marcus Navarro as the sole beneficiary. Together, they formed a mosaic of madness and intent. Detective Samuel Ortiz took the stand first, his voice calm and steady. He described the night they disarmed the timer under Helen's bed and how the wires connected directly to the propane line. Evelyn followed, recounting their discovery of the forged documents and the night they hid in the closet while Marcus crept through the dark with a flashlight. Each word tightened the room's air, each fact stacking against a man who sat motionless beside his public defender, staring into nothing. When it was Helen's turn, she stood slowly. Her voice was soft but unwavering. She spoke not of vengeance, but of confusion, grief, and love twisted by fear. "My son isn't evil," she told the court. "He's sick. I saw it too late." The defense called Dr. Philip Sanchez, who testified to Marcus's diagnosis, schizoaffective disorder with paranoid delusions, a condition that blurred his grasp of reality. In his mind, the doctor said gently, he wasn't trying to harm his mother. He believed he was saving her from imaginary threats. His actions were the result of psychosis, not malice. The judge listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When the verdict was read, not guilty by reason of insanity, the room remained hushed. Marcus was ordered to undergo 3 years of compulsory treatment at St. Teresa Psychiatric Hospital under constant supervision. Helen wept, not from anger, but exhaustion. The sound that escaped her was less a sob than a long, hollow exhale, as if years of fear were leaving her body all at once. Evelyn placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. But Helen knew it wasn't, not really. Months later, life had quieted. The house felt different, less haunted, more like a place for breathing again. The nightly 9:15 p.m. calls had stopped. Now, the phone would ring at odd hours, afternoons, mornings, sometimes just before dinner. Marcus's voice on the line sounded softer, uncertain but real. "Hi, Mom," he would say. "How's the garden?" They never spoke of the past. Helen answered each time, steady and calm, no longer afraid of the ringing phone. The calls had become ordinary again, not the ritual of obsession, but the fragile thread of something still human between them. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the Sandia Mountains fade into dusk, she caught herself smiling at the memory of that terrible night. The lie she had told, "Yes, I'm alone," had saved her life, and in its strange way had saved Marcus's too. Sometimes, she thought, love doesn't mean forgiving everything. It simply means staying long enough to tell one last truth, even if it begins with a lie.